Welcome, everybody. This is Always Forward with dshaw, and we have a really interesting and exciting show for you today. I'm going to tee everything up and then disappear and be quiet for once. And Tara's going to guest host today. We're doing a dev-related show, and we have a fantastic crew of individuals joining today to have a discussion around service workers. So I'll be back. I'll be sharing our sponsored moments. Today's All Is Forward is brought to you by Wobot and Operation Code. So thank you, Wobot, for the sponsorship and Operation Code, and look forward to a wonderful conversation. So I'm going to let Tara pull in our fourth panelist and kick off the discussion. And see y'all soon. Have fun.
Bye, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye.
Maybe bye. Yeah.
Maybe bye. I hit the wrong button and holy on the screen.
He's like, just kidding. All dshaw. Step one.
Does that get rid of me?
It just got rid of your image.
Okay.
Well, I will say while he's figuring it out, I'm really excited to be here. I've been giving some talks on PWAs a lot lately, and service workers are by far one of the most complicated things that people are always asking questions about. So we have an amazing panel that I'm very excited about, and we have two on screen right now. So if you two want to introduce yourself, Patrick, do you want to start by introducing yourself and
Sure.
Giving us a little information about your life with service workers and PWAs?
Yeah, totally. So my name is Patrick Kettner. I'm a PM over at Microsoft Edge, where I manage a lot of new and upcoming technologies. I do a lot of like spec work and outreach work and DevReli type stuff. And I think my first thing I did at the office was message Jake about how I was pushing to get Service Worker inside of Edge. That was like literally about like minute 2 of my job here. And, you know, luckily a couple of weeks later, supporting it and not too much longer, we had code. And in our upcoming release that's coming out soon, a couple of weeks, hopefully, we're going to be having Service Worker enabled by default for all users. And so that'll be a huge boon. A lot of people use Windows in the world, and so it's going to be awesome. Yeah, and in general, I've been a web dev for 18 years now, and it's something that has finally made me feel like the web is becoming complete. So thanks, Jake. And
yes,
you can
I'll
over
take
now.
full credit for everything to do with Service Worker. It was all me. Yeah, no one else.
Yeah. What else is new, right?
Yeah, so I was a web developer. I don't know if I should get to say I'm a web developer. I tried to make offline work for website lanyard.com, or for their mobile site anyway, and found out that this app cache thing, which I'd heard so many good things about, just wasn't really working. I wrote a big article complaining about it, and yeah, no good deed goes unpunished. Google said, "Do you want to try and fix it?" And I'm like, no. I'm good at complaining, not good at fixing. But I was sort of partnered up with much smarter people. So Alex Russell at Google, Arne van Kesteren, Mozilla, and also people like Andrew Betts, the FT, who was doing similar offline first stuff. And yeah, together we sort of and with lots of other spec people and browser people came up with this thing called Service Workers, which we now have, which is kind of amazing to think about that it was sort of a silly idea about 5 years ago.
I also kind of like the fact that you didn't introduce yourself in terms of your name.
Oh, did I forget the most
You just went
important
straight
detail?
into like, oh yeah, I did offline, don't worry about it.
Oh, and also my name is Jake. Yeah.
I guess my turn. I'm Matt Gaunt. See, so or Mont, yeah. Anyway, I've been on like the peripheries of ServiceWorker stuff. So I work on DevRel with at Google, and I've been doing like testing stuff for ServiceWorkers and been working around like with the people who have been doing a bunch of libraries for ServiceWorkers. I've been doing a lot of work with the web push spec, especially supporting just like how to use it along with the offline use cases, and then built a couple of libraries. So Firebase Cloud Messaging for the web, and most recently working on the latest version of Workbox, which is a whole set of libraries that basically try and make ServiceWorkers a bit easier to use, cover off some common use cases. And I've just been the team lead for that, working with Jeff Posnick and a whole bunch of other people. Yeah, that's me.
Nice.
I should explain what I said before. That there's a great video that Matt did, and he's, no fault of Matt. He's great in the video, but the people who did the graphics work for the video just messed it up, and they got his Twitter handle wrong. But that's not the main thing. His name comes up as Mont Gaunt.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Which is now like my nickname now. Like Monica like sat at my desk because there was a dog next to me and she was stealing my desk for the day. And then after she was like, oh, I was unofficial Mont for the day. It's like, thanks.
Mont. Oh man, I feel like we need a rebuttal from that graphics team, like live on like Maury or something. So the next thing I want to do is, since I know a lot of people probably listening to the show are familiar with ServiceWorkers, but to kind of get more information trickled down, I thought the best thing that we could do is kind of go through, have each of you describe 3 different things. Have Patrick describe PWAs, have Matt describe ServiceWorkers, and then let Jake talk about the Cache API. So we're hoping to kind of keep it around the 3-minute range, but just Patrick and Matt, remember, the less you talk, the more Jake can rant. But Patrick, if you want to kick it off with describing PWAs to the audience, we'd appreciate that.
Sure. So, gosh, it's almost 3 years ago now, Francis Behrman was having dinner and came up with the idea of the phrase progressive web apps. And it's at its core a marketing term, much in the way that we have responsive design or these other concepts that are really just sort of a loosey-goosey connection of ideas. We need a way to describe them to bosses or to salespeople or to people to convince. We needed something like that for this new technology with ServiceWorkers and Manifest and stuff, and that's where progressive web apps came up. And so that's a big thing to keep in mind, is that it's not like there's no rules for what a progressive web app is. It can be stuff. It's really just making as kind of taking things that people today traditionally think of app-like behaviors and moving it over into web-powered products. And so it doesn't just have to be an app. It can be a website. And the things that power progressive web apps, the biggest one is ServiceWorker, which we'll get into in the near future. I'm assuming most people know what a ServiceWorker is on the call, but in general, ServiceWorker is a way to enable offline on a website. There's a whole bunch of caveats and a whole bunch of other stuff, but somebody else, Matt, I think will get into what a ServiceWorker is. Then there's some other pieces as well that are useful. There's the app manifest, which is basically just a big JSON file that defines a whole bunch of configuration stuff, things like the title of a web application, theme colors, stuff like that, so that when you save an application PWA to your device, you have all the metadata needed to power app-like stuff. Yeah, and so progressive web apps are really just kind of a fundamentally new way to think about how to make web content on the web. Like I said, it's not just, it can be used for apps, absolutely. Some of the early PWAs were, stuff like the new mobile Twitter, which I prefer on all my devices, including desktop, is a PWA. It's fantastic thing. It loads content and caches it so that it's available quickly, whether you're online or offline. And then in addition to that, it's leveraging new APIs like the push notifications so that you can have content pushed to you even when the web page is closed. You can have things like syncing so that you can close a tab and still have a file be uploaded in the background, just like you would in a native application. And yeah, it's basically closing the gap between web content and native as best as we can in the browser world. So yeah,
that was
probably
great.
about it.
Good job, Patrick.
Thanks.
All right, Matt, you're up.
Yay. Yeah, so ServiceWorkers, like I actually really liked Mariko, who works on the Google Chrome team as well. Her description of ServiceWorkers was kind of delightful. She gives this amazing talk where she talks about if you imagine like an internet connection comes from the earth and it has to go to a satellite somewhere in space and then it comes back down. And that's kind of like the traditional way of doing web development, right? Like you request a file, it goes to the satellite, it comes back, and that's the response, and that's it. ServiceWorker is like an alien spaceship that comes in the middle of it, catches the request, fiddles with it a bit, sends it to the satellite, gets back an internet response, fiddles with it some more, and then sends it back down to Earth. And I kind of like that mental model of ServiceWorker getting in the way. Another way of thinking about it is you have your web page, it would make a request, and the ServiceWorker, at least for the offline case, can act as a proxy to the network. So again, it can intercept any request from that page, regardless of whether it's your assets or not. Thank you for adding a link to the chat. Yeah, and this proxy can like manipulate it, make a request to the network. It can be something completely different. It can come back. You can then store it in a cache or not, manipulate it further, and then return to the page. And the nice thing with ServiceWorkers is like the offline use cases, I think, where like the first set of like implementations we're like focusing on was that use case. But now we're seeing, because browsers are treating this as like a special file in the sense of you can have multiple service workers, but you largely have this notion of a service worker where the browser can spin it up, fire events inside this JavaScript file, completely separate from the web page. So it can happen in the background in the case of push. But then there's things like background sync is like, well, the network's changed, so you might be able to make a request now. And it's kind of interesting, the more use cases that you think about it of, well, if this JavaScript file can run in the background, what use cases does it enable? So that's my take on it. I hope that Jake and Patrick are okay with that. Haven't destroyed it and butchered it.
I think that was great. And I think that that is one of the most exciting things, is just thinking about all the new things we can do when we just imagine the fact that we have this JavaScript file at that we can play with now.
Yes.
So now, Jake, you are up, please.
Yep, I've been given the least interesting one to explain. The cache API is storage, origin level storage, so origin level like IndexedDB, like local storage, but you can just put requests and responses in it, very similar to how the browser cache works. It supports, you can put all kinds of responses in there, so including the opaque ones. So the kinds of responses where you can't get at the data for it, but you can use it for APIs that do support opaque data, like script, CSS, images, video, audio.
Is it worth explaining what an opaque response is?
Nope.
Yes.
Nope. We're just going to gloss over it. Okay. So I would say we made a kind of mistake on the web platform 20 years ago by allowing this sort of these cross-origin with credentials requests to happen, and they've been a source of security bugs ever since. So this is the way that if you include a script to another origin or an image to another origin, it will send with the cookies for that origin and bring you back some data. In terms of script, it'll be a script that executes. In terms of an image, it'll be an image that displays. And that leaks some data. With the image, it'll be the image size or whatever. But by the time we got XML HTTP requests, decided, well, we can't just give people access to data on other origins, because that's how you'd be able to read other people's emails or their banking details. So the concept of cores was invented, where the other server has to opt in to giving you that data, and there's no credentials, cookies and stuff sent by default, which is much more sensible, much safer. But we're stuck with these opaque things that work for script, that work for CSS, that are sent with cookies by default. There's, we've got 20 years worth of content that uses these. So yes, we needed to explain that in Service Worker land. When people say Service Worker are complicated, the reason it's complicated, right, is because we gave you the opportunity to put script in the middle of this thing that was not defined for 20 years. And we had to define it in all of this stuff that has organically grown. So it's like, yeah, you're in the middle of that now. It's your problem, not our problem.
Sorry, I feel like I'm causing you to have a meltdown right now, just live on this.
But yes, so with the Cache API, we want you to be able to store things like script, CSS, images, these things which don't have to have data that you can get access to every byte of. So we needed to do that in a safe way. You can cache that as well. Getting back to the Cache API, that has a kind of matching system that's very similar to the HTTP cache. So it uses things like matching on the methods, the URL. It supports vary headers as well, similar to the HTTP cache, but it completely ignores all the freshness headers. So stuff is in that cache until you remove it. Stuff only goes in when you add it deliberately. Stuff only comes out when you remove it deliberately. That's the Cache API.
And a big thing to point out is that it's not the app cache API, because they are commonly confused by a lot of people.
Does anybody actually want to talk about the app cache API then?
Do you really want to?
But just Google Jake Archibald app cache and you can find out all that you need to know about app cache. But cache API, wonderful. App cache, terrible. That's the summation.
Yeah, we won't touch on that today. I don't know if dshaw is ready. We can do our ad slot right now if he's ready. And everybody, if you just want to dance in the intermission to keep everybody entertained. Perfect. Oh, we're close. So I guess now I'm just here to dance. This is our first time doing this switch, so please bear patience with us as we get this rolling. Good job!
Better. Oh my goodness. Thank you. All right. And then I cut her off mid-sentence. I'm going to dive into this and go ahead and share to keep it short and sweet. First and foremost, we have a brand new sponsor this week. So really excited to welcome Wobot as our sponsor. So get this down as minimal as possible. So Wobot. Wobot is a project that Joe Doyle, we had on the very first Always Forward with dshaw, is working on amazing application. So mental health impacts us all. Coming out of Stanford University, Wobot is the first chatbot clinically proven to reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety. Wobot Labs is looking for experienced Node.js, React, and mobile engineers to join the team and that is bringing mental health to the masses. Learn more about Wobot and the opportunities at Wobot at wobot.io/jobs. So I'm a user of Wobot. I absolutely love that what the team at Wobot's doing with simple application, Node, NLP, and leveraging the well-proven clinical practices to bring forward experiences in and mental wellness that we all need, and probably spend too little time. So if you're passionate about that, I highly recommend reaching out to Joe Doyle and heading to woebot.io/jobs and check them out. All right, now we're going to seamlessly transition back, and I'm going to get rid of myself again, which is so much fun. Tear it back on screen. Thank you.
Good job.
Yay! All right. I'm going to bring...
You're a quarter of the way there.
Yay! The 20-second slot that like takes 2 minutes to deliver in here. All right. And
just to remind everybody, there is a tab if you have any questions for the panelists during the show. There's an Ask a Question tab that you can add to. And we'll be going over a few questions that we've had from people on a Twitter poll that we did. And then we'll get to the questions towards the end of the show, so you have a chance to add them in there. Matt. Just waiting on Matt. So I know that Matt can hear us, so I'm going to go ahead and let you know one of the biggest requests that we had on the Twitter feed was asking about best practices. So I'm curious if you want to go around and kind of give us an idea for all of you what best practices each of you go by, and like what resources that you may lean on for your best practices or have created for your best practices. Whoever talks first gets to go first.
A stone cold silence.
Well, one tip. So recently, Safari released ServiceWorkers in 11.3, I think. Their very recent update in the last week or two. Now that Firefox, Safari, Chrome, and Edge has it behind a dev flag, it'll come out to stable builds soon, like I said. Big thing is to test browsers. ServiceWorkers can fundamentally break a huge part of your web app or website if they're not done correctly. And what's great about the open web is that we have a whole bunch of different people deciding how to do something correctly. And so there's a lot of different bugs in different ServiceWorkers. There's stuff in the iOS version that is still new and flaky. It still needs to be found out. So don't expect that just because it works in Firefox or works in Chrome or works in Edge that it's going to work on all browsers. So yeah.
Yeah,
one tip.
I think that's a good point, because like at least in the early days between Chrome and Firefox, there were a number of differences between them. And it's interesting with ServiceWorkers because you can actually get really far really quickly, and these differences don't really tease themselves out until you've like really been relying on them for a little while. So yeah, that's a good point. And like I said, I've been working on Workbox, which it's basically like a number of tools that have been built by people to try and make ServiceWorkers easier to use. And it's a lot of default best practices just kind of baked in as much as possible. So that would be kind of where I would go, in the sense of like, I've written plain JavaScript ServiceWorker stuff, and I would recommend anyone to do it in the sense of it's a great learning experience. But there definitely comes a certain point where you start writing boilerplate, or you start realizing this feels really boilerplatey. And that's the point where like Workbox were trying to kind of get to a point where it's just like, well, the boilerplate can be abstracted away, but you can still write your own custom logic if you want to. And I think, at least from my opinion, and I'm 100% biased since I work on it, like we are trying to get to this point where it fits as many use cases as possible. We're still not there yet, but we are working towards it. So that would be kind of my main tip. The other thing is set a max age of 0 on your ServiceWorker, because if you don't, you will cry. And Workbox does have a check where it says, hey, it looks like your cache header is not set to what we'd expect. Maybe you should set it. And the main reason for this is a lot of people are used to that dev flow where they deploy something, or they're working on like a development server and suddenly the ServiceWorker isn't behaving the way they'd expect. And it's because the browser will still cache a ServiceWorker file for a maximum of 24 hours, but it will still cache it. So you'll kind of refresh the page and it's not working. And suddenly you go into this weird loop of like, is this what I put? Is this not what I put? Why isn't it doing what I thought it was going to do? And there's kind of this weird like double lag that you get. So yeah, max age, header 0, and everything will be fine.
Yeah, we changed the spec so we already had a little bit in the spec to cap the max age at 24 hours. But yes, we realized that it's too common on the web for JavaScript to have like a
year
5-minute cache or something, which I think is a really bad caching header to have. Yeah, you see a lot of sites with that. And yes, it causes all sorts of problems. So we have changed the spec to assume a max age of 0 unless you opt in via an API, but that hasn't hit browsers yet. So
I think Firefox has it.
You are correct, actually. Yes, Firefox does have it.
Like in stable, they have that?
I think so. I think they've had it for a while.
Oh, no shit.
I mean, I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure. Like,
yay, Firefox.
Yeah.
My best practice advice would be to know what your service worker does. I think, and I know that sounds that sounds ridiculous, but we're kind of used to on the front end, kind of bring in a library and sort of like, you know, have a brief look at the API docs and then just sort of, yeah, it'll be fine. And what happens if you get that wrong or you don't understand what the library does is, yeah, you end up with a part of your page maybe not working or not working in certain situations. If you do that in a service worker, then it can result in the user just not being able to visit large parts of your site. So we've seen Create React App. They tried to ship with a sort of default service worker, and it caused a lot of problems because by having a service worker that's there by default and you're not in control of it, you're just reinventing all of the problems of app cache. It's this thing that's doing some stuff, you don't know why. So yes, and I would say that you can still use a library like Workbox and be in control of the service worker because you're still telling Workbox what to do. But if you're just picking a service worker off the shelf and just assuming it'll do the right thing, you're probably going to get bitten by something.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing we've historically seen from a lot of tools is they work great for a static site where you have a set of assets you want to pre-cache and just that's it. And whenever you build your site, a static site, you get a static service worker. But I'd agree with you. Like, I think you should be kind of handcrafting it a little bit more than that. But each own.
Well, there's no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I had another tip. Do not rely on the offline checkbox in Chrome DevTools. It does not do offline in Service Workers. It will give you a false sense of security. I have complained about this bug a number of times. It still catches me out, even though I'm aware of it for like a year now. It just don't do it. Like, it doesn't work. So
is that still a bug? Like,
yes.
Oh,
yes.
I've been complaining. Okay,
Don't. There's a whole thing. Apparently, lots of work is going on the network stacks. There's no point getting fixed, but just don't rely on it. Just literally, you have to disable your network. Anyway, sorry, Patrick.
No, but yeah, just to the original point, the great thing about, I'm a huge fan of Workbox, and that's because it abstracts boilerplate. It doesn't abstract logic. Like, you're still fully in control of it. And the problem with what Create React App and other similar or other more basic libraries have done is that they try to abstract all the logic away so the dev doesn't have to think about it. And that's when you get into a lot of sticky situations. So.
Yeah,
I will say, because we have used a lot of like with the Vue CLI and the PWA template, Preact with their, you know, at the 100% with the Lighthouse scores with what they're doing with PWAs and Create React App. And now the Angular CLI too also has Service Worker flag on creating a template or skeleton project. It is always really great, like Jake's saying, to know what's happening, and a lot of those have really great comments inside of their service worker files to kind of guide you through what's happening. So at least read that. But I think that's really a really good point, that a lot of times we're kind of throwing these in there to, you know, understand and figure out what's happening and not completely rely on what's already there helping you.
Yep.
So another thing that came up in the Twitter questions were asking, so I feel like it's been pushed a lot that people understand that service workers have to be served over HTTPS, you know, or you could do it through your local host. And I know that Chrome is going to be doing some work to make the fact that it's either secure or not even more prevalent than it already is on your browser. But it still is kind of scary, I think, for people to understand that there's something, manipulating your requests to the network and to your application. So what are some other insights you have about the security of service workers? None.
I feel like Jake was touching this.
Yeah, this is definitely in Jake's.
Okay. So your service worker script has to be same origin, so you can't you can't use a service worker on another site as your service worker. And the reason we did that is just we didn't want to turn like one small XSS into a really, really bad situation where someone finds somewhere where they can run JavaScript on your site and they force your users to register this service worker on evil.com, and it's taking over all your stuff forever. So it has to be a script on your origin. You can then import scripts from other origins within that service worker. That's fine, but you are still in control of kind of the main root entry point. Yeah, you can intercept any request that your page will make, including the request for the page itself. But and sure, you can take a request that's destined for Facebook and rewrite it, which sounds a little scary at first, but you're only lying to yourself when you do that. It's not a security problem for Facebook. You're just sending different data back to yourself. Things that could go really wrong with a service worker security-wise, if you get XSS, then an attacker could be injecting code that changes stuff in the cache API. So even after you fix that bug, there could be users with bad data. But this is nothing new, right? This is true with IndexedDB. This is true with local storage. If you get an XSS attack where users have been able to run JavaScript on your site that you didn't want, you really just have to clear out all storage. And there's a web standard called clear site data, which is a header you can send, which purges everything, which I would recommend doing if you've hit a security issue like that. I think that's only in Chrome right now, but it's a web standard, so hopefully we'll sort of see that landing in other browsers. But yeah, if you feel that you've been attacked, then clear everything in the cache API, clear everything in IndexedDB. And handily, this is something that you could do in the install or activate phase of a service worker, because that's your good sort of point where the old, potentially broken, hacked thing is going away, your new okay thing is arriving, and it can go, right, first thing I'm going to do is just get rid of everything that could potentially be a problem. But yeah, it's, I guess, yeah, it's just storage.
Another way of looking at this, and it's kind of a common set of problems that people hit when they're using this, is there's a common set of things you would expect to work in the browser that don't when it comes to Service Worker. So a common one is, like, a lot of big companies, when they're working on their site, they'll move all their static assets to a CDN. You can't do that for a Service Worker because the entire point is you need to prove that you own that Service Worker file. So it needs to be on your origin. And normally it's going to be at the root because of a thing called scopes. That's normally the second issue that people hit, where you normally put all of your JavaScript under like scripts. If you do that for a Service Worker, the only pages that Service Worker file can control, the URL has to start with scripts because of this thing called scoping. So the idea there is if you were a website like CodePen or JSBin or Glitch or something like that, you can only register a Service Worker for like that particular subdomain or that nested group. And the reason for that is if you registered a Service Worker under like, mydemo.codepen.io/swjs, and then you can control all of CodePen, that would be terrible for CodePen. So instead, you can register it, but it will only apply for that like subdomain. So for that origin. So those two things as well, you kind of get to the point where you start realizing, oh, this is actually really annoying when you're first working with it if you make one of these mistakes. But when you unravel it, it's just a security mechanism to make sure you're not doing something a bit awry that you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, the scoping story is there's history there. The reason we ended up having to do that, as in, you have to be able to prove you can put a Service Worker there to control that URL onwards. it's because of sites that have like tilde username, and you can do what you want within that space, but you can't control tilde someone else's username. And our pushback on that was, well, but they can already change IndexedDB and local storage for the origin, because the origin is the web security model. Like tilde username is not the web security model. But the argument that came back was, well, but come on, this is a little bit more than DB. You could essentially just by someone visiting tilde your username, when they visit tilde someone else's username, you can just control that entire content, serve different pages, pretend it's broken. And we're like, fair enough. And that's how scoping was invented. But really, the origin is the security boundary of the web. And that's why, Glitch is doing the right thing, because it's project name.glitch.me. And so you control that whole thing. I think CodePen maybe do something similar. I'm not sure. But yes. No, they don't. Okay, JSPen don't either. They should do that. Because yes, you're sharing this origin space, IndexedDB and whatever. But there is a HTTP header you can serve with the service worker to say, yeah, do you know what? Okay, I'm in this deep directory, but I am allowed to control the whole origin.
Yeah. Shout out to enterprises who can't control their file structure. It's always a cool thing. So there's always a way around it with the header.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So another thing that we wanted to touch on is with each browser, you're going to be handling your cache a little differently. A little, yeah. And then also just a lot of people always have questions about the limit of how much you can cache, and that varies with each browser. Could you all kind of give some tips / warnings for caching just in general?
Yeah. I forget it was a Googler who had it. I forget the name of the site, but there's a site where it'll just load your cache with junk data just to see how big it is. Do either of you remember the name of it?
I think that was Jeff Posnick, and it was when we were researching the Safari limit, because they said something that was a bit generic and vague in their blog post when they first launched it. I can't remember it though.
I think there was like I think it was somebody actually at like Google Japan.
Oh, it could have been Kenji
that had it originally. Could be, yeah. I'll find the URL and add it unless Jake knows it. But basically, cache data is drastically different in sizes in different browsers. Chrome and Firefox generally have been the best. You can have up to like 50% of available disk space theoretically, I think. It's a theoretical possibility. Edge and Safari have been much more guarded. Generally, that's because we work at the company that makes the operating system, and the operating system does not want us to fill up the user's cache data. And so in Edge, it is substantially smaller. It's several hundred megabytes per domain, barring available disk space and things like that. But it's drastically different in different browsers. It's worth testing and knowing what you can actually add. There's a bunch of weird little caveats to cache sizing. One interesting thing that I got pinged on recently was that if you add opaque images to your cache, because the security issue here is, imagine if you request somebody's Facebook avatar or something. If everyone's avatar was at facebook.com/user.avatar, it's the same URL. You could detect if someone was logged in by requesting that image and then checking the size, because the default's probably going to be a lot smaller than an actual large image. As a result, if you're requesting a image and it doesn't have the proper CORS headers, it gets, I don't know if it's by standard, but it's usually like 5 to 7 megabytes. It's like 7 megabytes, regardless of the size. So if you're requesting a 1 pixel spacer.png, that's normally, like less than 20 bytes, it will be 7 megabytes in your cache, and it doesn't matter that it's garbage data, it will use up your cache. And so it's really good to make sure you're paying attention to what cache size you're using to make sure that you're not being hit by that. And actually, that was a bug in Workbox, this particular one. Did you get pinged on that, Matt?
No, but
okay. I'll tell you about it later.
Yeah, there's a whole ton of stuff that I'm still learning around that particular
it was. Y'all are triggering CORS pre-flight on certain images, and it's yeah, it's a cool thing. I'll tell about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so caching is that was the thing I had to say.
So there's a feature of the storage API called request persistent storage or persist storage. I can't quite remember. It's in the storage spec. But this is a way that we, as a developer, you would call it, and the user has to give permission for that. But once they give permission, then it kind of grants them access to as much disk space as they want to eat. I think in Chrome, we don't actually show a permission dialog. We use heuristics to decide whether you're allowed that or not. And our heuristics are if it's like being added to the home screen or if it's been bookmarked, then we will auto grant this. And this is the way we want to make things like Netflix work offline. If they, want be able to store entire movies and not delete it. Because although that we allow a lot of storage, we also quite aggressively delete storage.
The cache API, that we mentioned before, it can randomly delete your entire cache if the browser chooses to. If we need to, like the operating system thinks we're low on space, or if the browser's having a bad Monday, we can remove your entire thing. It won't ever remove segments. It will only remove the entirety of the cache. But the persistent data thing will actually give you permanent data where you can be assumed that it is there. It's not going to be arbitrarily removed by the browser. Sorry, Matt.
I'm assuming when it removes the cache, it's going to unregister the service worker. So then when the service worker comes back, it's just like, oh, okay, I'm basically a brand new.
I don't think that's a requirement, but I think all browsers do that.
Yeah. The storage spec says that to remove it, the storage box has to be removed, which
okay.
And so the storage box is IndexedDB, local storage. The service worker registration itself, the cache API. I don't know if all browsers do that, but that is what the standard says.
Yeah. I have no tips. Like I say, Workbox pre-caching is trying to do a lot of magic behind the scenes to just not consume as much of the cache as humanly possible.
Do you want to just cover pre-caching real quick for folks that are new?
Yes, good point. So pre-caching, so when you open up your service worker, there's probably going to be files that when you register them, you want to save them immediately. So the next time the user comes back to the page, there's a certain set of files you can rely on being there. So pre-caching is this basically way of, during the install of your service worker, when no pages are being controlled, you save a load of files to the cache. And then when the service worker activates, that's the point where pages can start being controlled by that service worker. And at that point, any old service workers will go by. So at that point, you can remove any cached files that you no longer need. So pre-caching is basically the term that I think is sort of pseudo been agreed on, that the install and the activate phase is when you do your pre-caching, the files that you desperately need and want to rely on. So yeah, if the service worker goes away and then it comes back, then that's, again, where you set up pre-caching. And then when it's new one, you just want to update the files that you need, that have changed, rather than absolutely everything.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you'd normally pre-cache stuff like the page itself or CSS, JavaScript that is always used, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Things like super common, the logo for the site is never probably going to change that often. So that can be great.
Yeah. For thinking in an offline first way, a lot of this gets easier if you try and put yourself in a native app mindset, the way native developers have to, because when you download the Twitter app, you're downloading the layouts, the behaviors, but you're not downloading your Twitter timeline. That doesn't come from the Play Store. So when you open the Twitter app, then that's when it's going to go and get your Twitter timeline, and it might store that as well, but it's not part of that package that gets shipped down. So that's the difference between the two, really. The things you would install in your install event is the things that the App Store would give you. So things like your CSS, your JavaScript, the bits of HTML, the things that just define your app. But things like the data, avatar images and stuff, that's stuff that you'll just cache as the user uses the app.
Sorry, so that puts us on a good point to have one more announcement from dshaw about a really great organization. So yes, if everybody can sing and dance for this transition again.
Jazz hands.
It's like the best dancer gets taken off the screen first. Oh, there you go. Oh, no.
I'll take that personally.
T-Shaw's probably like, I couldn't control it.
I'm still here. How bad a dancer was I?
If now I go before you, then you really know.
Oh my goodness. Bye, Jake. Bye, Tara. Oh, wow. Oh, this is fun. Oh, fantastic conversation. Thanks, everybody. So let's dive into our second spot. So second spot is today is Operation Code. So Operation Code is a fantastic organization that I've had the pleasure to work with over the past year. And as we're spinning up sponsors for this, I am sharing a bit of a plug for something that I'm sharing this year with Operation Code. So smooth transition and slide deck. Yay. All right. So Operation Code. So Operation Code is a organization. It's the largest community dedicated to helping military veterans and family launch software development careers. So this year on Veterans Day, on November 10th, Operation Code is going to be hosting a gala in Seattle this year. Last year had a wonderful group of guests from Intel and Nike and IBM and a few startup friends. Come and hear the Operation Code story. Hear our nation's service members, share their experiences coming out of military service as technical individuals, and then re-entering the workforce, and how Operation Code took the valuable people skills and technical skills that are often not using the latest buzzwords, service workers, and are leveraging legacy technology to deliver that reliable infrastructure that is so characteristics of what needs to go into service. But Operation Code connects the dots, that passion, that ability, and helps folks enter the workforce, have the latest skills, and have a great impact. So thanks, Operation Code. It's been a real pleasure to work with you all. All right, and now back to the show. Dun, 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 dun. Tara, dshaw.
I should have recorded your humming. It could have been our intermission music. Played it on loop. That.
No dead air. Patrick. Bye.
There we go. Oh, we're getting so much better at that. We'll have it in no time. So there were there was one other question from a user. Matt is coming, but I know you can hear us. But I want to make sure we touch on these questions from the audience. And if anybody else in the audience has questions, remember that it's the tab that says question below. Try to stump the panelists. No, I'm just kidding. So the first question is from Matt Gaunt. Is this? No, I'm just kidding. That was our test.
We can definitively answer yes to that. Moving on.
It did have 3 votes. So so the first thing down here, there's 2 questions from Khan. Let me know if I'm mispronouncing that. But the first thing he's asking is, did you have a chance to check out Cloudflare Workers? How do you feel about the design decisions behind it, implementation, like a custom wrapper around V8?
I haven't checked it out, so I can't comment.
I've played with them briefly. I thought it was a really, really good idea. It's not something I thought of. The idea of having like service workers sort of running in outside the browser is kind of where they started. There was an experiment done by someone at Twitter, Tom Ashworth, where he created the ServiceWorker API. This is back when it was just a spec or a sketch. He created the ServiceWorker context using a Node.js based proxy. And so you plug the browser through this proxy and it would give you what felt like a service worker, as much as you could do with a proxy. And it was somewhere where we tested a lot of the APIs and sort of got a feel for them, and we made sort of big changes as a result. But yeah, so having Cloudflare sort of doing a very similar thing, but more than just a toy, like something you could actually use in production. Yeah, I really like the idea, and they've been looking at a lot of the streaming stuff to kind of support the full set of APIs, and they've been feeding back to us as well on API changes or additions that would help them. One of the things they're looking for is a way to pipe WebSockets through ServiceWorkers, which we'd sort of stayed away from for a long time because we thought WebSockets were going to be replaced entirely by HTTP2. That doesn't look like that's going to happen anymore. We're going to end up with WebSockets over HTTP2. So yeah, we're sort of looking at their ideas and thinking, yeah, this is some of this stuff is definitely going to influence the service worker spec.
And I barely use them. I think they're neat.
I think it's an awesome idea.
Yeah. Oh, just to make sure everyone was clear, though, the idea is effectively taking the concept of service worker-like interface and moving it into a node environment. And so Cloudflare lets you upload these little worklets to modify or to return different content based off of logic in a service worker-like fashion.
So that actually is touching on something that we were going to ask anyway, to kind of meld this into the always forward platform where we usually focus on Node a bit. But we have seen different libraries and different tools attempting that relationship of Node and service workers. Have you all thought about that much and what that future may look like for Node and service workers? What do you predict?
The thing that seems the most interesting is the stuff that the Cloudflare team is working on. They definitely seem like they're the most active. It's kind of an interesting overlap. There's not a lot of... The idea of service workers is effectively kind of putting a little proxy in your browser and being able to do different stuff based off of some logic that you give it. And so when you think of it that on the server side, it's a bit of an odd concept. Like a server that's offline doesn't really do anything, and a server that other people can't reach isn't really useful. But there is the where they do overlap, I think, is where Cloudflare has been doing really interesting work around the idea of being able to share your logic, so that if a third-party service is down, maybe you have fallback data and you can have that logic on the client side and the server side simultaneously. Other than that, no, I have a lot of bugs in Edge to fix before I figure out how to bring service workers to Node.
I do kind of like the idea of Node having like support for some of the other events like push and background sync, like if you could write a Node app and then deploy it on a Raspberry Pi, and then randomly you can start setting up for all these like bunch of random events, and it starts like Node starts becoming the platform on top of like a Raspberry Pi. That would be kind of cool. And I remember that being one of the first things that the Firebase team were kind of like, oh, you want to do SCM? That's cool. By the way, if you can make it work in Node, that would be great. And it's just like, I haven't even considered how or why, but that would be kind of awesome if you could do it. So yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting. Like, I think it's just the use case, like Patrick was saying, it kind of feels weird off the bat, but it definitely would be kind of cool if there was some additional ecosystem that could kind of spin off from it.
Yeah, there's a few web APIs making their way into Node right now. So we've got the URL API from the WhatWG is now in Node, and as is the text encoder and decoder stuff, which which I'm really excited about. It's nice using those familiar APIs there. There's a GitHub thread, which I just posted in the chat, and that's about, which I had prepared, and that's about bringing fetch, the fetch function, and therefore sort of request and response objects into Node. I think it's a really interesting idea. That one in particular would be very complicated because there's lots of stuff like security restrictions that are in the fetch spec that don't apply to Node. Things like CORS, CSP, a lot of stuff like that. Maybe some of those would apply to Node in some situations, but it would be stuff that would have to be worked out. Personally, I would rather see the WhatWG Streams API go into Node before we thought about fetch, before we thought about service workers.
Jake and Streams. Who would have thought that would have come up at some point?
And this is the thing. There is a bias here that I struggled with Streams for so long in Node. I still kind of do. I find the WhatWG API a lot easier to get my head around. That might just be me, but things like text encoder decoder, the work is happening now to make those transform streams, as in WhatWG transform streams. So I don't know. I would like to see at least a compatibility layer around WhatWG streams, and then I guess we can start looking at other fetch stuff if people are actually interested in it.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing, is that companies like Microsoft and Google are willing to put in the work if there's actual use cases and people wanting it and showing effort in it. And so if this is something that any of the listeners really want, do something to show it, and it's more likely to happen.
I think I kind of feel like that's what happened with the PWA support in general, is that it got the attention, and then more people kept talking about it, and then browsers listened, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So I want to make sure we get all the questions answered here. So Khan had one more. Can there be premature service worker implementations like single page application stuff? And how do you know when you are ready? I like that second part of the question. How do you know you're ready?
I mean, that's a tough question. How do you know when you're ready? Go on, someone else.
My advice would be to making a service worker work for you, especially in the offline first sense, is so much easier if you've got a good caching story already. So if you're in control of your caching headers, they're doing the right thing, you know what they're doing, everything else becomes a lot easier. You can fight against your caching headers using a service worker, and that's handy if you're not in control of the server, but it is a lot more difficult than just letting the HTTP cache and the HTTP layer do its thing as best it can, and then you enhance on top of that with a service worker.
Yeah. My biggest thing is you don't have to wait for an entire re-architecture to start using a service worker or other things. This is something that you can, making sure you have a great base of your HTTP layer, like Jake said, is definitely a first step. But assuming that's the case, you can do a pre-cache on just your company's logo or whatever, and just dip your toe in the water, and that logo will load much faster after that, and just you can layer on after that. It's not something where you have to fundamentally rethink of how you're doing routing or anything like that. It's something you can layer on, and it's pretty hard to shoot yourself in the foot when you do that sort of a thing, when you have the low risk things. And just so start yesterday and don't be afraid. It's a great win for everybody.
Yeah, I think once you feel like you've got the best practices of web down, then treat it as a progressive enhancement and just move forward. Like, I think there is a tendency to think of like all the possibilities of service worker, and actually the basic stuff is where you want to go first. So yeah.
I like to always remind people is that one, when you're working with a service worker, you're working with JavaScript and promises. So it's something that you're used to probably working with. And also one of the very first things that starts your service worker file will be checking to see if it's supported and where you're working. So again, progressive, you're not breaking anything. And just the benefit that it does make your application more accessible to people who don't have the best like connectivity. So if anything, you're kind of helping out your users, and taking that step isn't very dangerous at all. We have a lot of questions, and I have so many personal questions that we didn't get to. So round 2 will be tomorrow. No, I'm just kidding. But I did want one other person was asking, and I think this is pretty. I know Jake, you wrote about background synchronization, and I think you answered it well in the tweet, but more people liked it. So Matt's running away.
Yeah, I gotta run. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Matt. So if you just want, we can just reference periodic synchronization and what happened to it in like a minute if you like, so I don't keep you all too long.
Yeah, sure. It's not like completely dead. It may return.
Do you want to say what it is first?
That's a good point. You're very good at that. I've noticed. I just jump in assuming everyone already knows. Oh, that's such a bad thing to do. Yes, periodic sync. So we've got background sync API, which is shipped in Chrome, and other browsers are looking at it. Is it in Edge? Not yet.
Not yet.
But it's something
we are excited about it.
And that's a way to say, hey, I want to do this little bit of work when the user has connectivity, which is either now, if possible, or sometime later. And so there's a little bit of background work that can happen sometime later. But we're very cautious about letting the browser do things in the background when it's not on the user's screen, just for privacy reasons, for battery usage reasons. And that's why right now a push message has to show a notification, because well, there's an upfront permission, and you have to show a notification. So that means as a user, oh, something has happened in the background because I had this notification. Periodic sync.
Right, sorry, just to clarify, right now, if a browser supports it, you can send a push notification and run some JavaScript code in your service worker for a little while.
Yeah.
But it's not something that if your app is completely offline, you can't run code every hour or every 2 hours. That was what periodic sync was for. And Jake will continue.
Yes, exactly. So that idea of I want to, I don't want to use push for whatever reason. I just want to update on some predefined interval. We haven't looked at that yet. One of the things and it's just because it's deprioritized of things. We want to look at push, but without requiring the notification to be shown, and what restrictions we'll have to apply in order to make that possible. So one of the things we're kind of throwing around right now is this idea that you'd be able to send push with a payload. It'll land on the user's device, but that it won't do anything with the service worker until the user actually goes to the website. So they go to the website and you're provided with this data that was sent sometime earlier, but it's there instantly because it was already on the user's device. So trying to find a way to do periodic sync in a way that's, the user's aware that stuff is happening in the background is really difficult. And so it's just a lot of unanswered questions there. And we're also monitoring what native platforms are doing, and they are applying more and more restrictions and heuristics to periodic syncing kind of things, like really cutting down on the amount of times that they can wake up and the conditions with which they can wake up. So, not just time, but also only do it when the phone's plugged in. Some of that's interesting. That might be the route we go down. But we have to bear in mind that these native apps, they've gone through an app store check process, like a system or a human has checked that it's not, had a cursory look at least to see it's not doing anything evil. We don't have that on the web. So we, whatever heuristics native is doing, we're going to have to be even harsher on the web and even more careful. So yeah, it's not.
Lest we end up with Bitcoin miners on the web that are constantly running in your background or something.
Exactly. And we tabled foreign fetch for similar reasons. Like, we're not going to ship this stuff unless we've got a really strong story around, battery and privacy. And we don't have that story for periodic sync yet.
So I'm going to go ahead and actually thank you for those answers. I feel like I learned a ton, and I think the audience did as well. And I want to wrap this up so everybody can get back to their day jobs so that we can have better service worker support in our browsers. Now,
if we've got a spare 2 minutes, there's been a question in the chat which I actually have an answer to.
Oh.
that okay?
Oh, good.
Please.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
So it's Simeon. Hi, Simeon.
Yes, Simeon's asking, like, can we use push or something similar to trigger off sort of larger asset fetching? That is actually something I'm working on right now. Is a system called background fetch. So the idea there is it's an API. You say I want to fetch all of this stuff, and it will go away and fetch it in a user visible way. So similar to how downloads work in browsers right now. And then once that's done, the service worker will be woken up to say, we've got all this stuff. What do you want to do with it? And this is the system we want to use for downloading large things like movies, which are typically like thousands and thousands of little files. It tends to be how it works now, or it could just be one big file. And so we don't want to have to keep the browser awake for all of that happening. We want it to be able to go away, the user to be able to turn off the screen, do something else, and that download just continue. But also things like uploads as well. Like if you're uploading a gallery of 100 photos from your holiday, we don't want you to have to be staring at the page waiting for that to finish, which is the state of things right now. We want that to be able to happen in the background. You'll get a little progress notification on a phone or some part of UI in the browser. So that's how we see that happening. You won't need to use push or background sync for that sort of stuff.
Nice. One thing that I kind of wanted to do, if everyone's okay with it, is on our sign up kind of let people know a good resource to use for service workers. And we're big on community. So if you have a way that you think people can help contribute to parts of like what you do with service workers or where you would like their input, maybe a reference to that. And I'll just say, since Matt's not here, thanks to Matt Gaunt, and you can find him on Twitter at GauntFace and on YouTube as Mont Gaunt, right?
Still kind of here. I see that chat, man.
And yes, so if you could go around and thank you, Jake, and thank you, Patrick, very much for being on here, and dshaw, thanks for making this show. So I'll let you all give your resources and information.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Okay. So I don't really have any new resources that I haven't already mentioned. Workbox is a great tool. You should check it out. They do great stuff. Contributors are welcome, as Matt said in the chat. Otherwise, if you're interested in any of the Edge stuff, like I said, we're going to be releasing the version that has it enabled by default very soon. So keep your eyes on Windows Update. You can find me everywhere at my name, Patrick Kettner, Twitter, GitHub, Facebook, Instagram, anything that exists. I claim the username. Are we doing pluggy things as well during this time? Or okay. Just one thing that's some friends of mine over at Samsung Internet have an event called Samsung Create. It's down in San Jose on the 19th and 20th. It is not a free event. It costs a couple of dollars, but all the money, 100% of it goes to a charity. I believe Girls Who Code. It's a fantastic event. They're great people. Y'all should check it out. We can talk about, I'll be there as well as some other Edge folks. We can talk about service workers and other cool stuff if you happen to be in the Bay Area. That's me. I
feel like I already plugged background fetch. Here's the thing I want to know. Before I was even invited. I'm sorry for that. I guess okay. I can plug an article. It's one I wrote a while ago, but I try and plug it because it answers a lot of the hairy questions around the service worker lifecycle and sort of the right way to treat that, and it covers some of the things that we've talked about today. So I've posted that in the chat. It's an article covering everything I know about the service worker lifecycle.
Nice, useful. So, Jake, in lieu of a plug, do you want to tell us the name of your pub trivia team?
We change our name every week, and it's stressful trying to think of a witty name. We have failed to come up with a witty name every time, but we always change it up.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I'm going to share a couple things. So today we announced training is being added to Node Summit. So Node Summit is adding first ever training. So the 26th and the 27th have 2 additional days to the Node Summit experience, and you've grown up with Node Summit over the past few years. It's kind of been where the big stories of Node, sort of Node success came about, and Node's kind of gone and made it. So can't keep on telling that story. We got to really invest in the growth of the ecosystem. So this year we're bringing that training, and on the 2nd of May, I'm going to be joining Ahmed Nasri up in Toronto for Node Day Toronto, working with the local community there, and sharing the experience of TELUS, rebuilding their digital platform all on these open standards that you've heard today, and Node.js. So really excited to share that. Over to you, T.
I did not prepare to answer this question. I was like, all of you answer these things. I will also be in Toronto with dshaw, working, leading the security panel, or moderating the security panel. Very excited about that. I just think that there are a ton of great things. I really like Matt's code labs on ServiceWorkers that exist if you're diving into ServiceWorkers, and tons of stuff. And I wish we could have had a little more time to talk about the storyline for stores for all of PWAs, because I know Edge has a great thing that they're doing. So hopefully we'll just hear more from all these people soon. I'm very thankful for all you coming out and enlightening us on all of this. So thanks.
Yeah, we'll have to come back soon and have that discussion, and hopefully next time we'll be able to dive deep, a little bit deeper into how this connects into the Node ecosystem, and how it can make this great new component of the web platform a part of that broader JavaScript ecosystem, and bring all that together.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to come back and talk more anytime. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.